I was on the floor, gasping for air when my stepfather's boot pressed against my ribs, pain radiating through my entire chest like fire ripping me apart. Blood dripped warm and sticky down my cheek, blurring my vision. He towered above me, his face twisted in rage, holding a crumpled stack of mortgage papers as if they were weapons. "If you had just signed," Richard roared, spit flying from his lips, "none of this would have happened. You brought this on yourself." My mother stood a few feet away, arms crossed, her eyes colder than I had ever seen. She didn't rush to help me. She didn't flinch at the sight of my blood. She only shook her head and muttered, "Stop being dramatic, Clara. You're embarrassing us. You should have thought of your family before you refused." Her words cut deeper than Richard's blows. She was my mother, the woman who once held me when I cried as a child, the one who promised me I'd always have a place in her heart. Now she watched as her husband beat me nearly senseless, and she blamed me for it. I could hear the pounding in my ears, the ragged sound of my own breathing, fighting to stay steady. The papers were shoved toward me again, Richard's thick fingers jabbing at the signature line, his face red with fury. I wanted to scream, but only a broken whisper left my lips. "Please, stop." He pushed harder against my side, and I felt something crack deep inside. My vision spotted black, but then through the window the sudden flash of red and blue lights painted the walls. A neighbor's shout echoed faintly. I realized someone must have heard the chaos. Hope flickered in my chest, tiny but alive. Richard froze for a moment, listening to the sirens. He hissed under his breath, "Don't you dare say a word to them. You'll regret it." My mother's voice followed immediately, as cold as winter steel. "Get up, Clara. Wipe that blood off your face. If you tell anyone he hurt you, you're destroying this family." I collapsed again, unable to lift myself. The pounding on the front door grew louder, urgent. Police voices shouted commands. Richard backed away, clutching the papers, his chest heaving. My mother lingered over me, her perfume mixing with the copper scent of my blood. She bent low and whispered so only I could hear, "You did this to yourself. Don't expect me to protect you." In that moment, I understood something terrifying. Family wasn't always the people who shared your blood. Sometimes family was the enemy inside your own home. As the door burst open and uniformed officers rushed in, their eyes widened at the sight of me sprawled on the floor, my face swollen and bruised, blood staining the carpet beneath my head. One of them shouted for paramedics, another restrained Richard as he tried to protest. I could barely hold on, but I caught the look of shock on the younger officer's face, his jaw tightening as he glanced from me to my mother. Even cops, men who had seen horrors before, shook their heads at the cruelty of what they had walked into. My lips trembled, forming words no one seemed to hear. "Help me." The world tilted and dimmed, the voices blending into static. My last clear memory before darkness swallowed me was my mother's eyes, not filled with fear or concern, but with something close to disdain. That was the night I realized the truth. My fight was no longer just about surviving Richard's fists. It was about surviving my own mother's betrayal. And that betrayal, as brutal as any beating, would scar me forever. I grew up believing family was supposed to be a shield, but looking back, I realized my shield was paper thin and already torn by the time I was 12. My name is Clara Jensen. I am 28 years old, and I live in Denver, Colorado. I work as a credit officer in a mid-sized bank downtown, a job that taught me more than I ever wanted to know about debt, bad decisions, and the way financial desperation can rot the soul. My father died in a car accident when I was still a child. I remember the sterile smell of the hospital corridor, the way my mother Linda clutched my hand and whispered we would survive together. For a while, I believed her. Then, Richard Cole came into our lives. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a salesman smile that made everyone think he was dependable. I was 12, grieving and desperate for stability. He married my mother within a year, moved into our modest home, and slowly began to take over everything. At first, he bought me gifts, baseball tickets, and a shiny new bike, things my mom said we could not really afford. I wanted to like him. I wanted to believe he cared, but soon the mask slipped. I remember the first time he yelled at me for forgetting to wash a dish, the way his voice thundered through the house. By the time I was 14, I knew how to read his footsteps coming down the hall, knew whether it was a good night or a bad one, just by the way the floorboards creaked under his weight. My mother, always eager to keep peace, would excuse his temper with soft words like stressed, tired, worried. The truth was simpler. He liked control. By the time I left for college, I carried 2 lessons with me: never owe anyone money and never let someone think they own you. At the University of Colorado, I studied finance. I buried myself in numbers and learning how money could be protected, how contracts could trap people or save them. I thought if I understood the rules well enough, I could never be manipulated again. My mother barely called except to ask for help paying bills when Richard's ventures failed. He tried one business after another, from car dealerships to construction to a failed restaurant, each ending in more debt. My mother believed in him blindly. She would call me pleading, sometimes crying, saying I was their last hope. Each time I helped a little groceries, a utility bill, until I realized the pattern. They were never satisfied. When I got my first job at the bank, I promised myself to build a separate life. I rented a small apartment, modest but mine, and for the first time I felt free. Still, I visited them out of duty. At Sunday dinners, Richard would ask about my salary, how much I saved if I planned to buy a house. He would make comments like, "You should put your money to good use for the family." My mother would nod, adding pressure in her soft but insistent tone. They resented that I had independence. They resented that I did not hand everything over. My father's insurance money, what little there was, had long been squandered by Richard. All I had was my paycheck, my savings, and the determination to never let history repeat. And then came the mortgage scheme. Richard had purchased a property with a balloon mortgage, believing he could flip it quickly. The market turned, buyers disappeared, and suddenly the bank was ready to foreclose. He needed a guarantor to refinance someone with a clean record and stable income. That someone was me. The request came over dinner. Richard laid out the documents, sliding them across the table like a dealer with a winning hand. He said, "Clara, it's simple, just your signature. You won't have to pay anything. The bank just needs reassurance." My mother leaned in with that familiar pleading look. "Please, honey, we could lose everything. You don't understand how important this is." I felt my chest tighten because I did understand. I had read cases just like this at work. I knew the risks. Signing meant I would be legally bound if Richard defaulted, and knowing his history, default was inevitable. I said no, calm but firm. The air shifted immediately. My mother's face hardened and Richard's jaw clenched. He said, "After all I have done for you, this is how you repay me." My mother added softly, "You owe him, Clara. He raised you when your father couldn't." Those words felt like knives. My father hadn't abandoned me. He had died. But to her, Richard had become more important than the truth. I left that night, shaken with the papers still on the table, my mother's eyes burning into my back as I walked out. From that moment, the fracture that had been growing for years split wide open. What I did not know was how quickly that fracture would turn violent, and how my own mother would choose to stand on the other side. The requests did not stop after that dinner. They only grew sharper, more desperate, and more cruel. Richard began calling me at work, his voice booming through the phone so loud my coworkers glanced over. He would say things like, "If you don't sign Clara, you are condemning your own mother to the street, or you think you are smarter than the man who raised you." My mother sent text messages at midnight filled with guilt reminders that family helps family, that blood is thicker than contracts. Each word weighed on me, but I knew exactly what would happen if I gave in. I had seen credit reports destroyed, entire lives ruined, because someone had trusted a desperate relative. Richard started showing up uninvited at my apartment. I remember one Sunday morning, still in my pajamas, hearing the pounding on my door. When I opened it, he was there in a wrinkled suit, eyes bloodshot, holding the mortgage file like it was sacred scripture. He shoved it into my hands, jabbing at the signature line with a nicotine-stained finger. "Sign it now, Clara. End this nonsense." I told him again, steady but terrified, I will not put my name on something that will ruin me. His face turned red, veins bulging in his neck, and for a moment I thought he might hit me right there in the hallway. Instead, he spat on the ground at my feet and walked away, muttering that I was ungrateful. Later that week, my mother called me, her voice trembling, but not from fear, from anger. She said, Clara, you are being selfish. Richard is trying to save this family and you are standing in his way. I tried to explain calmly. Mom, this mortgage is a trap. The bank will come after me. You will still lose the house. But she would not hear it. She shouted that I had been poisoned by my job, that I cared more about numbers than people. Each conversation left me shaking because underneath her anger was a choice she had already made. She chose him every time. The tension bled into family gatherings. At my cousin's wedding, Richard cornered me near the buffet, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his breath sour. He hissed, "You think you are safe in front of these people. You are not." My mother approached just in time to hear the threat, and instead of defending me, she whispered harshly, "Clara, stop provoking him." I felt the humiliation wash over me because it was not private anymore. Other relatives began asking questions, repeating rumors that I refused to help my own mother, that I was hoarding money while my parents suffered. I realized Richard and my mother were poisoning the entire family against me. The cruelest part was the words she used. She told them I had forgotten where I came from, that I was ashamed of them, that I thought I was better. None of it was true, but gossip spreads faster than truth. Soon even my aunt looked at me with disappointment in her eyes. It was working. They were isolating me, painting me as the villain. One night, I met my best friend Monica at a diner, sliding into the booth with tears I could no longer hold back. She listened carefully, her lawyer's mind ticking behind her patient gaze. She told me, "Clara, you need to document everything, the calls, the texts, the threats. This is not just family drama anymore. This is coercion." Her words steadied me because someone finally named it for what it was. Still, I could not shake the ache in my chest each time I saw my mother. She was not only failing to protect me, she was actively weaponizing my refusal, twisting it into betrayal of her. The conflict was no longer just about a mortgage. It was about survival in a family that had decided I was expendable unless I surrendered my independence. And surrendering meant losing everything I had fought so hard to build. The pressure campaign became relentless, like a storm that refused to break. Richard escalated from angry calls to outright intimidation. He showed up outside my office one afternoon, leaning against his dented pickup in the parking lot, waiting for me to leave. My stomach dropped when I saw him because his presence there meant he was willing to invade every space of my life. He walked toward me with the mortgage folder in his hand, shaking it like a weapon. Colleagues glanced nervously, sensing the confrontation. He said through clenched teeth, "Clara, you will sign this today, or I swear you will regret it." His voice was low, but laced with violence. I forced myself to stay calm, answering loud enough for witnesses to hear. "Richard, leave me alone. This is harassment." He smirked a twisted smile that told me he knew fear was his leverage. That night, my mother called her tone icy. She said, "Do you understand what you are doing to this family? Richard is trying to save us. You are tearing us apart." I tried to keep my voice steady, telling her that he was dragging me into a financial grave, but she cut me off sharply. "If you don't help, you will not be welcome in this house again." The words hit harder than any slap. It was exile, a line drawn in blood. At the next family dinner, I foolishly hoped for some kind of reconciliation. Instead, Richard staged a spectacle. He placed the documents in the center of the table right beside the roast chicken and demanded in front of everyone that I sign. When I refused, he slammed his fist so hard the glasses rattled. He shouted, "Look at her, too good to help her own mother, too selfish to be part of this family." My mother, sitting by his side, added softly but audibly, "Clara, maybe you should leave." Whispers filled the room. Cousins staring, some shaking their heads in disappointment. I felt my throat close with shame, but I held my ground. I left that dinner humiliated, but also resolved. They were trying to break me with public pressure. I would not give them my signature, even if it meant losing them. Days later, Richard ambushed me again, this time outside my apartment. It was late, the sky dark, the air biting cold. He blocked my path, shoving the papers against my chest. "Sign it now, or I swear you will wish you had." His breath reeked of whiskey, his eyes wild. My heart pounded, but I forced steel into my voice. "If you touch me again, I will call the police." He leaned so close I felt the heat of his anger. "Then do it." See who they believe, the hard-working stepfather trying to save his home, or the ungrateful daughter who abandoned her mother. I knew then he was not just desperate, he was dangerous. He would use fear, humiliation, even violence to force me. My mother's role in all of this cut even deeper. She began calling relatives to tell them I was heartless. One day at the grocery store, my aunt cornered me saying, "Clara, how could you do this to your mother? She sacrificed everything for you." I felt the walls closing in. My own family had been weaponized against me. That night, I called Monica, my voice shaking. She listened carefully, then said, "Clara, this is coercion and fraud. We can get a restraining order, but you need evidence. Save every message, every voicemail, every encounter." Daniel, my boyfriend, insisted on walking me to and from work, his protective presence a reminder that not everyone I loved would betray me. Still, I could not shake the dread. I knew Richard was preparing something bigger, something that would not stop at humiliation. He had already crossed the line into threats. The question was how far he was willing to go, and the answer I would soon learn was much further than I ever imagined. It was supposed to be a birthday celebration, a simple family gathering for Richard at a restaurant downtown, but it became the stage for my final humiliation. I arrived because my mother begged me, insisting it would look bad if her only daughter skipped. I thought maybe if I showed up quietly, kept my distance, I could survive one night without incident. The moment I walked in, though, I felt the shift in the air. Conversations hushed, eyes turned. Richard sat at the head of the long table, a smug grin on his face, a whiskey glass already in his hand. My mother sat beside him, glowing with loyalty, her hand on his arm. I slipped into a seat at the far end, trying to disappear. But Richard had planned a show. Halfway through dinner, he raised his glass and announced loudly, "I want to thank my wife for standing by me and for believing in this family." He paused, then his eyes locked on me, and I knew what was coming. But some people here think family means nothing. Some people think their career is more important than their mother's home. The table erupted in murmurs, all eyes now on me. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. My mother leaned in, her voice clear enough to carry, "Clara doesn't understand sacrifice. She thinks she's better than us." My face burned as relatives whispered some nodding in agreement. My cousin asked bluntly, "Is it true you won't help your own parents?" I wanted to scream the truth, that this wasn't help. It was financial suicide, but the words tangled in my throat. Richard slammed the mortgage papers on the table with a dramatic flourish. "You can fix this right now, Clara. Sign it in front of everyone. Be part of this family." The room went silent. Every eye bore into me, waiting, judging. My mother's gaze was cold steel, daring me to refuse. My hands trembled, but I shook my head. "No, I will not sign." The silence broke into scoffs, mutters of "selfish, ungrateful, heartless." Richard leaned back, smirking as if he had proven his point. My mother pressed a napkin to her lips and said quietly, but with lethal precision, "Then you should leave. You are no daughter of mine." Her words sliced deeper than any knife. I stood slowly, my legs heavy, my chest tight with humiliation. I could feel the weight of their stares, the disappointment, the condemnation. Daniel stood too, his hand on my back, guiding me out. As we walked away, I heard Richard chuckle victorious in his theater of cruelty. My mother did not call after me, did not soften her words. That night, alone in my apartment, I stared at the ceiling, unable to breathe. The betrayal was now public official, sealed with my own mother's voice. She had disowned me in front of everyone. The shame burned, but beneath it a new kind of fire began to flicker. If they thought humiliation would break me, they were wrong. It would become the fuel for what came next. The night everything snapped began quietly, too quietly. I had just come home from work, the apartment dim except for the glow of my desk lamp. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my bag, and tried to shake off the sting of that humiliating birthday dinner. My phone buzzed again and again, calls from my mother, texts from Richard, each message more aggressive than the last. "Sign it or you will regret it." I ignored them, turned my phone face down, and tried to breathe. Then came the pounding at my door. Heavy, furious, insistent. My heart slammed in my chest because I knew that rhythm. "Richard, I hesitated, but before I could react, his voice bellowed through the door. "Clara, open this damn door right now." Against my better judgment, I cracked it open a few inches, hoping to de-escalate. He shoved it wide with one hand, storming inside like he owned the place. His face was red, his pupils blown wide, and in his other hand he clutched the mortgage papers crumpled from being carried too many times. My mother followed him in silence, her coat still buttoned, her lips pressed in a hard line. He didn't waste words. He thrust the papers at me, growling, "You're going to sign this right now. No more games." I backed away, my hands raised. "No, Richard. I told you I won't ruin my future for your mistakes." That one word, mistakes, set him off. He roared, grabbed the coffee table, and sent it crashing aside. Glass, shattered wood, splintered, the sound ricocheted through my small apartment. I froze paralyzed as he advanced. He shoved me hard against the wall, the plaster jarring my spine, his breath hot and rancid in my face. "Sign it or I swear I'll make you." I tried to duck away, but his fist came fast, connecting with my cheekbone pain exploding white behind my eyes. I staggered, but he didn't stop. His boot slammed into my ribs once, twice, the cracks echoing inside my body. I collapsed to the floor, gasping, clutching my side. My mother stood nearby, her voice cutting through not with concern, but with accusation. "You did this to yourself, Clara. Just sign it and he'll stop." Her coldness chilled me more than his blows. Blood filled my mouth, metallic and bitter, but I forced the words out. "Please, Mom, help me." She didn't move. Richard crouched down, shoving the papers against my face, the edges scraping my skin. His voice was a snarl. "Put your name here, or I'll keep going until you can't get up again." I tried to crawl away, my fingernails scraping the hardwood, but his hand caught my arm, yanking me back. Pain shot through my shoulder as he twisted it. My scream filled the room, muffled only by his rage. Somewhere distant, I heard a neighbor shouting footsteps in the hall, then the blessed sound of a phone call being made. Richard cursed, glancing toward the door, but not before landing one more brutal kick to my side. I thought I would black out then, the world narrowing to a tunnel of pain. The pounding on my door grew louder, voices shouting, "Police, open up!" Richard froze, eyes wild. My mother hissed, "Hide the papers, don't say a word, Clara." Her voice was venom, not love. The door burst open, uniformed officers filling the frame, their eyes going wide as they took in the scene. Me crumpled on the floor, blood smeared across my cheek, furniture overturned. Richard looming above me with fists clenched, my mother standing stiff and silent. The officers moved fast, one restraining Richard as he shouted protests, another rushing to my side calling for paramedics. I saw the disbelief in their eyes. Even cops who had seen so much shook their heads at the cruelty laid bare before them. I whispered one broken word, "Help," and then the darkness finally swallowed me. When I opened my eyes, the world was white and humming. The hospital lights glared above me, the sharp scent of antiseptic burned my nose, and pain throbbed through every inch of my body. My ribs screamed with each breath, my jaw ached, and my cheek was swollen so badly I could barely see out of one eye. For a moment I panicked, not sure if I was safe, not sure if Richard was still hovering above me. Then a gentle hand wrapped around mine and a steady voice whispered, "You're safe, Clara. I'm here." It was Daniel. His firefighter's uniform was gone, replaced with jeans and a worn flannel, but his presence felt like armor. He had been the one the neighbors called when they saw police lights. He had rushed straight to the hospital to sit by my bed. My voice was a rasp. "What happened?" He explained slowly. Richard was taken into custody. The cops saw everything. But my mother, she tried to tell them it was all a misunderstanding. My chest tightened at that. Even now, she was defending him. The doctor came in, clipboard in hand, his face grave. 3 fractured ribs, a concussion, severe bruising. "You're lucky to be alive," he said bluntly. "We're admitting you for observation." I closed my eyes, tears stinging because the words were true. I could have died on that floor. Later that evening, Monica arrived, her lawyer's bag slung over her shoulder, her expression sharp with fury. She leaned close, speaking in a low voice only I could hear. "Clara, This is more than assault. This is coercion attempted fraud. You need to file for a restraining order immediately." She pulled out her tablet, showing me the messages I had forwarded, the voicemails Richard had left, each one dripping with threats. She was already cataloging evidence, methodical and relentless. The police officer assigned to my case visited as well, a younger man with tired eyes. He asked for my statement recording my words as I recounted everything: the pounding at my door, the blows, the way my mother stood by. My voice shook, but I told the truth, every detail, because silence had nearly killed me. The officer nodded, promising they would secure the neighbor's testimony, the photos of the scene, the hospital report. Piece by piece, the evidence was forming a wall Richard could not climb. That night, lying in the hospital bed, I scrolled through my phone despite the pain. Dozens of messages from relatives filled my screen, some accusing, some silent. None asked if I was alive. My mother had already spread her version, telling them I had overreacted, that I had provoked Richard, that it was a family disagreement blown out of proportion. My stomach turned, but I saved every message, every accusation, as proof of her complicity. Daniel sat by my side through the night, refusing to leave. At one point, I whispered, "Maybe I should have just signed. Maybe it would have been easier." He took my hand firmly, his voice steady. "Clara, you would have lost everything. This fight is not your fault." His conviction gave me strength when mine faltered. By the next morning, Monica returned with legal documents. She had already filed for an emergency protective order against Richard, and she was preparing charges of assault and attempted financial coercion. She explained that Richard's debts were massive, that the mortgage had been a sham to buy time, nothing more. If I had signed, I would have been trapped for decades. Listening to her, I felt a surge of clarity. For the first time, the law was on my side, not theirs. The hospital had patched my body, but Monica and Daniel were helping to patch my will. And though my mother's betrayal cut deeper than any bruise, I realized I was not completely alone. I had people who chose me, people who believed me, and they were ready to fight. The weeks that followed were a blur of police interviews, paperwork, and endless nights waking in pain. My ribs ached every time I moved, my face was still swollen, and nightmares replayed Richard's fists and my mother's voice telling me I did this to myself. But Monica was relentless. She arrived at my apartment almost daily with folders of evidence, her eyes sharp with determination. She collected the police photos of my injuries, the hospital records, the neighbor's sworn statement, and every text and voicemail Richard and my mother had left me. Each piece stacked higher, a mountain of proof. One evening, as we spread the documents across my table, she said, "Clara, this is no longer just a domestic assault case. We are charging him with aggravated assault, attempted financial coercion, and fraud." I stared at the neat piles, feeling the weight of justice building like bricks around me. When the first hearing came, my legs trembled as I walked into the courthouse, Daniel steady at my side. The room smelled of wood polish and dust, the air thick with tension. Richard sat at the defense table in a suit that did nothing to hide the rage in his eyes. My mother sat behind him, hands folded, glaring at me as if I were the one on trial. The prosecutor laid out the case piece by piece. Photos of my bruised face flashed on a screen, medical reports read aloud, recordings of Richard's threats played for the court. My stomach clenched, hearing his voice boom through the speakers. "You'll regret it if you don't sign." Richard's attorney tried to spin a narrative that I had overreacted, that it was a family disagreement blown out of proportion, that Richard had been under stress and never meant real harm. But Monica rose with fire in her voice. She presented the mortgage documents highlighting Richard's history of failed ventures, his outstanding debts, the fraudulent nature of the refinancing. She pointed at my mother's text messages telling me to sign or lose my family evidence of coercion from both of them. Under cross-examination, my mother faltered. She claimed she never told me to sign, but Monica read her exact words from the messages. She claimed Richard never struck me, but the photos and hospital reports screamed otherwise. The judge's eyes narrowed as inconsistencies piled up. When it was my turn to testify, I stood shaking, clutching the edge of the witness stand. My voice cracked as I described the night of the assault. Richard's fists, my ribs breaking, my mother watching. I told them about the humiliation at the birthday dinner, about being ostracized, about the betrayal deeper than blood. Tears blurred my vision, but I forced every word out because silence would only protect them. When I finished, the courtroom was silent, except for the scratching of pens. Even the judge leaned forward, listening closely. Richard shifted in his chair, jaw clenched as if he could still intimidate me from across the room. Then came the verdict. The judge spoke with steady gravity. Richard Cole, guilty on all counts. Aggravated assault fraud, attempted coercion. Sentence, 12 years in state prison. The gavel struck like thunder, final and unyielding. Relief and grief collided in my chest. He was going away, but my mother's face twisted in fury. She stood pointing at me, hissing loud enough for the courtroom to hear. "You ruined this family! Clara, you are no daughter of mine!" The bailiffs escorted Richard out in chains as he shouted curses, but his voice no longer held power. For once, the law had silenced him. Monica squeezed my shoulder, whispering, "You did it." Justice was served. But as I stepped out of the courthouse into the cold air, I knew the scars ran deeper than bruises. My mother had chosen her loyalty, and it was not to me. Yet even in that hollow ache, there was a spark of freedom. For the first time, I had fought back, and the system had listened. After the verdict, the silence in my life felt different. Not the suffocating silence of fear, but the fragile quiet of something finally broken and done. Richard was gone, locked away behind bars, his threats reduced to echoes in my memory. My mother cut all contact, and though her absence ached, it also released me from a weight I had carried for years. I moved out of the small apartment where blood had stained the floor and into a new place filled with sunlight, white walls, and the scent of fresh paint that promised beginnings. Daniel was there, through every step steady and patient. One evening, as we unpacked boxes together, he reached into his pocket, his hands uncharacteristically trembling. He held out a ring, simple but gleaming, and said, "Clara, you deserve someone who will never ask you to sacrifice your dignity only to share your life." My eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of relief, of gratitude, of love. I whispered yes, my voice steady for the first time in months. Meanwhile, Monica encouraged me to channel my pain into purpose. With her guidance, I started hosting workshops at community centers, teaching young women about financial independence, about recognizing coercion, about saying no, even when family pressures cut deepest. At the first session, I stood before a room of 15 faces, nervous but determined. I told them my story in careful detail, not the bruises but the choices, the way knowledge had been my shield even when fists broke my bones. I saw nods, tears, the spark of recognition in their eyes. Each session grew more women arriving, some whispering afterward that they too had been pressured by relatives, that they too had thought silence was their only option. I realized then that my pain was no longer just mine. It had become a weapon for others to defend themselves. Still, there were nights when loneliness crept in, when I thought of my mother sitting alone in the house she had chosen to protect a man who destroyed us both. I wondered if she ever regretted it, if she ever replayed the courtroom and heard my words. But I learned to let the wondering go. Boundaries meant not waiting for apologies that would never come. Boundaries meant protecting the family I was building, not the one that had betrayed me. And as Daniel wrapped his arms around me in the quiet of our new home, as Monica laughed with me over coffee after another successful workshop, I realized I had found what I thought I lost. Family. Not by blood, but by choice. 1 year later, I stood in front of a classroom at the Denver Community Center, the afternoon light streaming through tall windows, dust motes glowing in the beams. A dozen young women sat before me, notebooks, open eyes fixed on my face. I held up a copy of a mortgage contract, crisp and harmless on the surface, deadly underneath. I said, "This piece of paper nearly cost me my life." My voice did not shake. I told them about red flags, about predatory debt, about setting boundaries, even when the person pressuring you is your own parent. I saw their heads nod, their pens moving quickly, their shoulders straightening with new resolve. Afterward, one girl lingered, barely 18, whispering that her uncle was trying to push her into signing a loan. She thanked me, said my story gave her courage to say no. That was the moment I knew everything I endured had been transformed into something greater. Richard sat in a prison cell serving his 12-year sentence. My mother lived in silence, cut off from the daughter she chose to betray. And I, Clara Jensen, stood whole again. Not unscarred, but unbroken, with Daniel by my side, and Monica still my fiercest ally. Family is not the blood that binds you, I told the class. It is the people who protect you when it matters most. That truth had been carved into me through pain, but it was now the foundation of my life. I walked out of the center into the crisp Colorado evening, Daniel waiting with a smile, and for the first time in years, I felt light-free and certain that I had rebuilt not just my future, but my family too.